Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 4, Episode 4, or Episode 64 overall, Skill Crane and Good Neighbors, both of which originally premiered on Nickelodeon on May 20th, 2005. And we're getting to the end of that early Season 4 period where they were, readjusting to, an episodic format and trying to figure out what can work and what can't, and I think with these two episodes, they aren't the worst this season has to offer, but they do stumble upon some very strange conclusions as to what to bring to the table going forward. But let's get started with the better of the two. Skill Crane was written by Kyle McCulloch, Aaron Springer, and Vincent Waller. And funny thing, this is one of the last episodes that Vincent Waller had a hand in the script for a pretty long time after this. He was mostly for animation duties and technical direction. Aaron Springer also stopped writing after this, but he did do some storyboards for Good Neighbors, and then he left SpongeBob for a season and a half to work on Billy and Mandy for Cartoon Network. And this is Kyle McCulloch's first episode on SpongeBob. I personally mostly know him as a South Park writer, so, I think he was already working on South Park at the time, so, yeah, very odd choice, but he certainly brought a cynical flavor to this particular episode, which I kind of like. And another thing you'll notice is that this is another Krusty Krab episode. Season 4 is when they really started to love using the Krusty Krab as their starting point for so many episodes, and I think over the years it got a bit more repetitive, but with Season 4 they were still finding new spins on what to do with, the Krusty crew and the Crustomers and, what can be done with them. The season had a lot of cool ideas, like Fear of a Krabby Patty, Shell of a Man, Krabs vs. Plankton, and this is another one of them. What if the Krusty Krab got a little arcade machine just for the customers, but Squidward ended up using it more. The funny thing about this episode is that we hardly see any customers in the Krusty Krab. I don't know if that was a story oversight or if that's just the intention that this is just very slow day, but it gives SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs more screen time, so I can't really be too miffed by it, because Mr. Krabs in particular is absolutely nailing it in this episode. He knows that Squidward is suffering throughout this and just wasting all his money on the claw machine. Ironically, the money that Mr. Krabs is paying Squidward, so he's getting that money back. Gosh, it's such a vicious cycle, but it is fun that it's, working on Squidward and Mr. Krabs. The claw machine is working, but eventually things go wrong, so that's why we never see the Skill Crane again for the rest of the series. I could be wrong about that. Maybe they could bring it back someday and pretend that it was always there, like they do sometimes for stuff. And this episode is also a continuation of stuff we've seen with Squidward before in Just One Bite and Snowball Effect, where once he gets into something, he gets addicted. He has a pretty addictive personality, and that's a thing that adults deal with. Sometimes they really cannot shake off that for some reason or another, and by this point, it is a part of Squidward's personality, so it's good that they use it for multiple different kinds of stories and scenarios like this. And we get to see, what happens when, it's driving Squidward to the brink, and it's always making him a bit on edge. Season 4, this particular episode is definitely the start of them, amping up Squidward's, rage. He got mad in the early seasons, but, Roger Bumpus always saw Squidward... Roger Bumpus is the voice of Squidward, of course. He always saw Squidward as, the Mr. Wilson to SpongeBob's Dennis the Menace, even though SpongeBob isn't that much of a menace, but I get where he's coming from. He's supposed to be, the old curmudgeon-y neighbor, and I think with episodes like these, I don't know if Mr. Wilson would have, gotten this furious. Like, I haven't been watching old Dennis the Menace episodes in my free time, but yeah, it does seem like we're starting to drift with Squidward's characterization just as much as with SpongeBob, like getting more childish and Mr. Krabs getting greedier. But, you know, in cases like Skill Crane, they're still using all this for good comedic effect. And it's been long enough that we're starting to see some more SpongeBob hallmarks start to return. Like, surprisingly enough, this right here is the first time card of the post-movie era. It's just a quick one, but I'm surprised that they didn't go super meta with it like they were doing in season 3, but hey, it is kind of cool. Like, for as much as I like Mr. Krabs' role in this episode, I do think that as it progresses, it gets a little messier, like with Squidward just completely falling off his rocker, and SpongeBob's, like, characterization, like, what they want out of him, changing on a dime. Like, in pre-movie episodes, he could sometimes be this fool and sometimes be the straight man to Squidward, but here, like, he is that at the start, and then he is the straight man to Squidward in the middle, and then he just gets a little ditzy again at the end. And it's pretty noticeable here because, well, the characters are getting gradually less consistent, so it is very odd when it all happens at once in one episode with SpongeBob and Squidward. And we're also starting to see, like, more extreme pain for Squidward. Like, this scene of him in his house, just sort of like his life being ruined by the crane machine. Not my favorite part of the episode, honestly. Like, they hammer it in a bit thick. But there is some humor here. I do like the, like, piggy bank shedding a tear. That does seem to be the sort of thing that they would have done in the pre-movie season, just to make a scene a little bit funnier. Just add a little bit more, like, lightheartedness to the situation. And that's really all I can say about Skill Crane. Like, I don't know a lot about crane games, so I don't really, like, have much to say about that aspect of it, but I do like Mr. Krabs' role. I do like Squidward and SpongeBob's roles initially, but I just think that it gradually loses focus as it goes on. But overall, it's a fine episode. I don't like it as much as I did back in the day, but that's just because, like, as I get older, I notice more flaws in these season 4 and 5 episodes than I did as a kid. But it's still got good moments like this where, like, the back and forth with Squidward and SpongeBob right here, where SpongeBob just is not letting the bit end. It's a variation of something that they already did with Man Ray in Mermaid Man 3, but I can buy it. So that's really all I have to say about Skill Crane, but there is more to say about this early season 4 period of SpongeBob. Like, a few more shorts that I can bring up than usual, because starting with season 4, they started to produce a lot more shorts for SpongeBob, just as, like, little promotional things, because, well, if any Nickelodeon show needed more promotion in this time, it was definitely SpongeBob, right? So we got, like, a little animation of SpongeBob and Gary for the Kids' Choice Awards when they unexpectedly won for the 2005 event. And that was broadcast during the Kids' Choice Awards on April 2nd, 2005, but it clearly uses, like, the season 4 art style and, like, tone. So you could argue that short is technically, like, the premiere of season 4 in a way. And then later in the year, we've got The Endless Summer, which was broadcast during this event about global warming called Earth to America on November 20th, 2005, but it was probably available online during the summer just because of its theme of, like, an endless summer. It's a short about Mr. Krabs just wanting to, like, heat up the ocean with carbon dioxide, SpongeBob taking it too far. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point of it. I don't think it's a very funny short. It is a bit more pretentious than I think that SpongeBob should be. But I do think that it spreads a fine message that, like, the oceans are getting warmer and, we shouldn't take advantage of that. But the funny thing is, it aired in 2005, and then in like 2011, Fox News got really mad at it and thought that SpongeBob was being liberal propaganda just because it dared to say that global warming exists in a short that isn't even really part of like the main series. I just find that kind of funny. But I mean, that's the most interesting thing about the short. It really isn't that amusing. But oddly enough, I do really wish that we knew if Steven Hillenburg and Derek Dryman or whoever were super involved in the Endless Summer, because that went out on like a major cable network, like another major cable network. I can't remember which, I don't have it in my notes. But yeah, if SpongeBob's going to talk about something that sensitive, I do really hope that the best creative people are involved, even if the short itself isn't that funny or worth remembering. And that's really all I can say about the Endless Summer, and we're still on Skill Crane, and this is the ending where things get a little wacky. Another weird thing about this episode is that, like, the quarters that Mr. Krabs gives Squidward and counts are gold, when usually in America and most places that use quarters, they're silver. That's kind of strange, but as long as Mr. Krabs surrounds himself in gold, I can't really, like, put it past him. Again, this episode is fine and funny, but yeah, you do start to notice more discrepancies, like, when you watch it more. And that's definitely something I can say about Good Neighbors, which was written by Mike Bell, and only Mike Bell. This is the very first episode of SpongeBob with only one writer credited, and would be the only one of these until season 9B, like halfway through season 9 after Sponge Out of Water was released. They changed up how episodes were produced in small ways just to, like, streamline it and bring it a little closer back to normal, and that involved just having one writer write out the episode and then they storyboard it and flesh it out. That didn't happen as often in the first 8.5 seasons, and Good Neighbors is a very good case for why, because there are just so many things about this episode that just don't feel right. Like, more than any other episode of SpongeBob up to this point. The way Squidward and SpongeBob act in this episode is particularly just a bit extra, a bit like, they don't really have a good grasp on the likable traits of these characters, and that just leads to some very disastrous results when you're looking at it from, like, a character and character humor perspective. And this is a trend that's going to continue and get worse as the years go on, so get ready. For many, this is the potential birth of the Squidward torture genre, where they dedicate entire episodes to just SpongeBob and Patrick goofing off and ruining Squidward's life in major catastrophic ways that don't even mash up by the start of the next episode. It's just an endless cycle of Squidward's life being turned upside down and SpongeBob and Patrick getting away scot-free. But at least in this episode, there are a few things that keep it from being, like, as egregious as your average, season 6 romp. But still, they arguably make the episode even more annoying than it should be. For one thing, not even Squidward's likable by the end of this, because, like, even he's kind of turned into the villain of the piece, just not accepting SpongeBob and Patrick's apology. And SpongeBob and Patrick themselves are punished by the end of this, so, no one is, like, in the right by the end of this. No one has learnt anything. No one's gotten richer from the experience. It's just a total comedy of errors. And, some people like that, which is why this sort of genre of episode became more common as the Tippett seasons went on. And it's not like they didn't do episodes like this in the first 3 seasons. You've obviously got like your Naughty Nautical Neighbors and your Club SpongeBob's, but even though those were definitely on the like less funny side, honestly, personally, IMO, at least like they had that good energy to them, whereas this just goes in circles and never improves. But you know, the funny thing about this sort of Squidward torture genre of episode is that, like, we all know why this was such a maligned genre of episode and why they've made them a lot less frequently in the most recent seasons. But the funny thing is, there is this sort of like growing anti nostalgia for this era of the show that most people who grow up in the post movie era of SpongeBob can relate to. Like, they do remember when these episodes were getting more common and it just kind of drove them away from the show. And it is kind of interesting that that's an aspect of the show that more people can relate to. Like, yeah, here's where things went wrong. It's sort of like with The Simpsons, the whole jerk-ass Homer thing, where that just gradually became a bigger problem during like the late 90s seasons. And with SpongeBob, with like the mid to late 2000s, you get more episodes like Good Neighbors and Breath of Fresh Squidward and Boating Buddies and Choir Boys. And like, I can list so many of them that are like this, that just don't really give the characters anything to learn. I'm kind of going in circles myself because there really aren't that many fun facts about this episode except for what it does wrong and the impact it has on the show going forward. But there are a few things that I do like about this episode. It's not completely unfunny. There are a few like moments and things about this episode that, are kind of funny. Like, I do like how SpongeBob and Patrick's like secret club is definitely something that kids would do just to like get along, play for the day. And I like that they're wearing fizzes. Fizzes are cool. And when Squidward cares about him being their president, I really do like the line of him saying, well, I'm glad Bikini Bottom came to their senses and elected me president. Even though isn't like Bikini Bottom like a small town, so it has like a mayor. But besides that, the scene's fine. And with Good Neighbors in particular, it's early on in the show enough for where a lot of fans were still watching and paying attention, but this episode really rubbed them the wrong way. Like Good Neighbors in particular just has this very like acidic reputation to it, which even a lot of like middle era episodes don't really have. Like it just had the impact on its audience it seemed to want. So I guess I'm just feeding into that. Like, I really do like, that meme format of Squidward kicking random people out of his house that is from this episode. And it probably wouldn't have been from this episode if people didn't remember it and have like this reaction to it. Because especially in this one, like Roger Bumpus is just going he's going hog wild with his performance as Squidward. And I don't know, for me, this isn't really like the sort of Squidward that I think is relatable. This is just way too extra. The only people who would really find catharsis in the way Squidward yells at SpongeBob and Patrick are probably people who, I don't want to be rude, but should probably get their heads checked. And with SpongeBob and Patrick, they do feel sorry, but they do go back and forth on how sorry they feel. And, well, at least they're punished in the end. Like, with SpongeBob, this is definitely a very odd duck in that he and Patrick are depicted as being about as intelligent as each other. But in that case, I really don't mind how they use Patrick in this episode. He doesn't do anything super wrong. Like, he's just following SpongeBob's orders. I guess if I had one positive for this episode, like one major positive, is that Patrick's the MVP. Like he doesn't really like have a say in anything. He only adds a few dumb jokes, which I mean is fine for Squidward. It's the dumb jokes. Oh, and here we go, the security system. Oh, the security system meme. I don't know the reviewer who like went on this rant, but it's a classic. I mean, one thing that came out of like the Squidward torture genre is just getting way too mad at SpongeBob episodes and just having the negative feeling rub off on you, which like I totally understand. Like I've been raising my voice quite a bit for this episode, so sorry. But yeah, I think like when that clip went viral, I don't really know who did it, but I really hope that like this meme hasn't like made them too upset. Like I think it kind of shone a light on like both like how annoying these episodes were and how annoying some SpongeBob reviewers could be in the early 2010s. Like when enough time had settled to the point where we were like, yeah, these episodes stink, but also like we didn't know how childish we were being just yelling at them and like I don't know, like yelling at a TV episode doesn't make it better unless it's the security system taking control of Squidward's house. And that in that case, it made the episode a bit funnier for me, honestly, because well, I mean, I do really think that it's a cool idea to like have Squidward's house be like this sort of like monster movie beast ravaging Bikini Bottom. Like, there's a reason that they use that on the season 4 volume 1 DVD set for the first disc. And the funny thing about like that disc and for when this episode was featured on the Where's Gary DVD is that it's a particularly one-sided blurb that they give it, where it's talking about how Squidward is the good neighbor. They just call it good neighbor, and how he is the one that's like being abused by this episode. And yeah, it's a particularly one-sided one, but I guess it's one that for at least the first half of this episode you can kind of relate to. And we've gotten like another classic little like reaction of Squidward just kind of yelling his head off. And if that was the only time in this episode that Squidward was like that, then sure, okay. But like he's making these ugly faces for like the entire second half of this episode. So yeah, it really drags the episode down in terms of appeal. And yeah, this is a pretty bad one. This is like a fully bad SpongeBob episode. We're starting to get to these, folks. Be prepared for like the next couple of years of SpongeComs, because it's going to be filled with more of me raising my voice. And that was Skill Crane and Good Neighbors. Last week for question time, I asked, what was your favorite season for specials? For me, it was season 4, but all of you had different answers. Bryce Fawn said season 8. Those are pretty good episodes you picked. Angry Jack, his number 1 was season 2 for Christmas Who in Shanghai. Also a very good choice. And Dashiell, I would have to go with season 5, just because there's way more specials in it, and I feel like they do a lot of experimenting with them by taking them to a new location and like showing the backstory of characters we love, like Mr. Krabs and Plankton. Yeah, very interesting choices. My question time for you for now until I come back to SpongeComs in September for episode 65 is, which episode marks the end of classic SpongeBob for you? Like unless it's Pranks-A-Lot, the obvious answer. Like, which episode got you to think, man, this show is kind of changing and leaving that classic format behind? Because Good Neighbors is that episode for a lot of people, but I want to hear what you guys think. And join me in September for a lot of SpongeBob and Squidward being miserable again and selling out and funny pants. Goodbye for now.